name's Dave, and I'm one of the pastors here at Gold Hill. It's my privilege to share with you from the Bible this morning, and whether this is a normal, everyday, or every week occurrence, and this is part of your regular routine, or whether this is new and you're visiting, or maybe this is one of your first times in church. It's great to see you this morning, great to be with you this morning. And just by way of introduction, we have been over the last month or so exploring a book in the Bible called Deuteronomy. You may have heard of it, you may not have done, you may have read it, you may not have done. And we've been doing that under the heading of Choose Life. It's some words in there where the people of God are at a crucial moment in their history as they're about to enter the land that God is leading them into. And he's asking them to make a choice. God is asking them to make a choice. If you don't have one of the Deuteronomy booklets, then they're heading their way around. And I'll be making reference to a few things in them today. So if you have yours, then do grab it out of your bag or grab one from one of the welcome team. The people of God at this crucial moment in their history, so they're about to step into the land. How are they going to live? Are they going to live God's way or their way? Are they going to choose to love him or love themselves? Are they going to choose to be obedient, or are they going to choose to be masters of their own lives? Are they going to choose God's heart for justice or their heart for the things that please them? These are some of the things that we've been looking at as we've journeyed through the last few weeks. And you'll be glad to know that we have finally actually got to the bit in Deuteronomy which is all about the laws and the regulations and the statutes and the codes and the ordinances and all of those things. So we're not going to be going through all of that in copious amounts of detail. I'm very sorry. Today we are looking at the first real bit where Moses does start to re-explain and sort of interpret some of the law for the generation they're going into. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 12, and we'll see that it has a lot to do with worship. But before we do that, I just want to say the next week is Pentecost, so we're taking a week off from Deuteronomy for that. When we come back, you'll have found that we'll have skipped all the way from chapter 12 all the way forward to chapter 27. The bit in the middle is the big legal bit, the bit with all the laws, the bit with the codes. We're not going to do those in detail on a Sunday morning. What we are going to do is in your Deuteronomy book, if you have one, and if you don't, you can find one online as well. There's an electronic version on the website. The daily readings, there are daily readings between now and then that you can use and follow if you wish to, which will take you through all of that. In addition to that, tomorrow night, if you're available, at 8 o'clock here, 7:30 for refreshments, but at 8 o'clock here, I'm going to be leading an evening where we're going to be exploring together how we tackle that section of Deuteronomy, how we look at legal stuff, law stuff in the Old Testament. What's the relationship between law and grace? I've been preparing for it this week and I've been getting quite excited. How do we approach the law? Does it still matter? Is it still relevant? Should we still pay attention to it? If there are bits we're not meant to follow, does that mean we can rip those bits out of the Bible and not care about them anymore? The answer to that is no, but we're going to explore why the answer to that is no, and think about how it is that we have a sort of unified approach to all of this. So that's something that we're going to be doing tomorrow evening. If you've not signed up, then maybe go onto the website and sign up. If you've still not signed up, come along anyway, and it's fine. But today we're going to be looking at this first bit, because this first bit is all about worship, and it's all about the people choosing to worship and answering this question: how should we worship? How to worship God when we enter into this promised land, as we stop being sort of nomads who are wandering around in a desert, in a wilderness, as we've entered somewhere where we're going to be settled. How to worship? How should we be doing that? And one of the things that you might notice as you read through that whole legal section is that one by one, the different parts of the Ten Commandments are addressed. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. And as we track through these words, we'll see that in their approach to worship, the heart is that they should have no other gods but the one God, the one true God. That is the overwhelming, overarching truth. You shall have no other gods but me. Worship me alone. Then we start to see how that actually needs to look like in practice once they've entered the promised land. So let me read Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verses 1 to 14 before we consider what this meant for them and what it might mean for us. Moses said this: "These are the statutes and ordinances that you must diligently observe in the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you to occupy all the days that you live on the earth. You must demolish completely all the places where the nations whom you're about to dispossess serve their gods, on the mountain heights, on the hills, and under every leafy tree. Break down their altars, smash their pillars, burn their sacred poles with fire, and hew down the idols of their gods, and thus blot out their name from their places. You shall not worship the Lord your God in such ways, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes as his habitation to put his name there. You shall go there, bringing there your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and your donations, your votive gifts, your freewill offerings, and the firstling of your herds and flocks. And you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and your households together, rejoicing in all the undertakings in which the Lord your God has blessed you. You shall not act as we are acting here today, all of us according to our own desires. For you have not yet come into the rest and the possession that the Lord your God is giving you. When you cross over the Jordan and live in the land that the Lord your God is allotting to you, and when he gives you rest from your enemies all around so that you live in safeties, then you shall bring everything that I have commanded you to the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. Your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and your donations, and all your choice votive gifts that you vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God together, you together with your sons and your daughters, your male and female slaves, and the Levites who reside in your towns, since they have no allotment or inheritance with you. Take care that you do not offer your burnt offerings at any place you happen to see, but only at the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do everything I have commanded you. Well, well, well. Interesting stuff, right? Maybe? Not sure? The thrust of this seems to be, for the Israelites, when you get into this land, don't worship the way that the people who lived there before worship. Don't worship at the places they worshipped. Don't worship the gods they worshipped. Instead, go to the one place that I'm going to set aside, that I'm going to appoint for you, and go and worship me there and nowhere else. That's my summary of these words. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into than just a summary. And I want to start by talking about this idea of worshipping God alone. That's the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Because if you look at verses 2 through to 4, really there's a lot of negative commands. Don't do this. You mustn't do this. Demolish this. Destroy this. Get rid of that. We see that they are not to worship anywhere. So it's not a case of go and worship anywhere. It's not anywhere anymore. So there is a place to go, and that's why God says to demolish the places that the gods of these other nations used to be worshipped, to take down their gods, to dethrone their gods, to hew down their idols, to get rid of all the things that the previous people used to use to connect them with the gods that they thought they served. This is what was being asked of the people. Not to go in and just take on the practices or the traditions or the places or the locations or the gods of the people that they were dispossessing, but instead to focus on Jesus. See, they worshipped God in many different places, on the mountains, hills, under every single leafy tree. There's almost a hint of sarcasm. Look, the number of different places that they worship point out how many different gods they have. We know the one true God. So we're not going to worship in lots of different places with lots of different gods. We're going to worship in one place because there is one God. This same thing, I think, is true for us, that we need to work out what it is that we might be letting distract us from God. What are the many different things that we might end up giving primary place in our life or giving too high a place in our life and not allowing God to have that place? Then we go on to see the importance of maybe a slightly more positive thing. In verse 3, we hear about blotting out not just the places where these gods were worshipped, but blotting out the names of the gods themselves. Verse 3, hew down the idols of their gods and thus blot out their names from these places. This is the importance of God's name. God's name is primary. God wants his name to be held in esteem. God wants his name to be known, not the names of these other gods. This isn't just God being petty and jealous and selfish. This is him saying, look, I'm your God. I'm the one that took you out of Egypt. I'm the one that you've been following. I'm the one who has your back. I'm the one who saved you and is redeeming you and restoring you. I'm the one who's going to lead you on to the future that I've promised. So focus on me, not on anything else, because he is the Lord their God. Verse 4, you shall not worship the Lord your God in such ways. He's saying, look, this isn't worthy of you. This isn't worthy of me. This is not who I am. This is not who you are. The idea, by the way, of a name is much more significant maybe than we might realize, because for us a name is just a label that we attach to someone. In thought at this time, a name carried something of someone's identity. God's name wasn't just a label that we used so that we knew who we were talking about. God's name carried his personality and his essence and his power. So when God talks about finding a place for his name to dwell, he's saying, I'm going to create a place where I will dwell. So instead of focusing on the name of God, if they'd allowed these other traditions and practices to carry on, they would have ended up actually worshipping the name of other idols, worshipping other gods, other things. And of course that can be true for us as well. We can live our lives pursuing God wholeheartedly. I know for me, I don't. I know that for me, there are things that I put in the way. There are things that I allow to become more important, either overarchingly in huge ways in my life or in small ways, in little ways. There are things that I allow to have a place that is too high, and therefore give God a place that is too low. In the booklet, you'll see, if you have it in front of you, then in the study notes for this week, there's a little box, and in it there's a quote from a pastor called Tim Keller, and he says this: the Bible uses 3 basic metaphors to describe how people relate to the idols of their hearts. They love idols, trust idols, and obey idols. There are things in our lives, I'm sure all of us, that we allow a place that they shouldn't have. And the way we can tell what they are is they're the things that we love, that we trust, and that we obey. We love them. They capture our heart. We're excited about them. They give us excitement when we wake up in the morning and we know that we get to see them, or we get to do them, or we get to have them. That in itself is not wrong. But when we don't just love things, we also start to trust them. We think, well, if I have more of that, then I'll have more security. It will get me through. Maybe for some, an idol might be money, or wealth, or security that comes from financial possessions. And we think there's nothing wrong with having those things. But when ultimately we start to trust those things for our security instead of trusting God, then something has gone astray. And then we don't just love and trust them, we also obey. We also end up doing things just in order to keep them. We do things so that we can have more of them. And we end up skewing the way that we live our lives so that we can pursue these things. We've become obedient to those things instead of becoming obedient to God. This is something to be avoided. This is something that is dangerous. This is something that is not our best. So what would it look for us to hew down those things in our life, for us to blot out the name of those things, to make a decisive step to say, that is not going to rule my life anymore. That is not going to be the thing that I pursue. Maybe it's family, maybe it's church, maybe it's a marriage, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's something that you're longing for that has not yet happened. All of these things can, and none of them are wrong, but all of these things can become too big in our minds and can take our attention off God. I know that for me, there are things that I need to work on in my life in that respect as well. But this doesn't just stop with a negative, get rid of all of these things. God doesn't just say, get rid of everything so that there's a vacuum. He then gives them something, gives them a promise, gives them hope of how they will fill that vacuum, of how it is that they will worship rather than just how they won't worship. The key verse, I think, in this whole passage is verse 5, where we read this: but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes as his habitation to put his name there. You shall go there. You see, this is about choosing to worship where God lives, the place that he chooses. He's saying, when you go, in all of your tribes, in all of this land, which is going to be divided up amongst all of your tribes, I'm going to choose one place, and that is where I am going to live. That is the place that he chooses, the habitation to put his name. This was a really crucial Old Testament principle of worship, that there would be a place, it became Jerusalem, and that place would be where the temple was, and in the temple would be where God would live. And when you wanted to worship God, when you wanted to meet with God, you went there. There would be a priest, and the priest would take your offering, and the priest would enable you to have that meeting with God. It was all in one place. Earlier on, when I stood up, I said, I wonder if a few might like to lead you in worship. That wouldn't have been allowed at the time. That was not something that would have happened. The priest, and I'm not a priest, no one here is a priest in the sense that the priests of this age would become, but a priest would lead you in worship. A priest would hear from God and would dispense to blessing from him and would take your offering to him. There was no direct access in the way that we can enjoy now. More on that in a moment. But at this time, God was saying, this is how it works. God was saying, I am going to create a nation, and that nation is going to be a picture of what it looks like when God is at the heart of it. That was the whole purpose of this whole Israel stage in the Bible story, was that other nations would be able to see a nation with God at the heart and would be able to be interested in joining that nation. It was all very coming towards the center. There was a nation with a tribe within it that had a temple, that had a place within it that God would exist, and you had to get there if you wanted to meet with him. This was God's initiative. This was about the whole nation being unified in the way that they would approach him and coming together to do it, being pure in the way that they would do it. He says, you shall go there and you'll offer your sacrifices. The temple was the place where the presence of God was known to be. Now, it might seem a strange passage to preach from, because I hope you'll know that that's no longer the deal. That's no longer the gig. That's no longer how we do approach God. I want to read a brief passage from John's Gospel, where Jesus is encountering a woman, a Samaritan woman. And there was a debate between the Samaritans and the Jews about where it was that the people should go to worship God. They all agreed that there was a place, but they disagreed about where that place was. I want to read John chapter 4, verses 20 to 20 something. We'll see. We'll see when I get bored and stop reading. John chapter 4, verse 20 says this. This is the woman speaking, and she says, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is Jerusalem. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. That's Jesus saying, it was Jerusalem, sorry, but the Samaritans are wrong. But then he goes on to make a much bigger, broader point, where he says, but the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as those to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. In this passage, Jesus is in some way bringing in a new age in the way that we would worship God. He's saying, up until now, the right place to do it, the right way to do it, has been to go to Jerusalem and to use all of these things that God has put in place rightly, that people would come to one place and meet with him there. He says, something is changing. Something is going to happen. Something has, in some ways, already happened. That means that we no longer have to do that. That worship isn't all centralized in one location. It becomes everywhere. That worship isn't just about coming to the temple and meeting with God through the priests and through the sacrifices and through those systems. It is becoming about meeting God everywhere in our everyday lives, in every single situation. Jesus uses the language of worshipping in spirit and in truth. This idea that it is about my spirit connecting with God's spirit, that there is a truth, that there is a closeness, that there is a connection between me and God that doesn't need to be mediated through a priest or through a temple or through a specific geographical location. Of course, the thing that was changing was that Jesus was opening the way to be with God. At that moment when Jesus died and the curtain temple was torn in two from top to bottom, from God's end to ours, at that moment, the way was opened. The way was clear, and there was complete access to the Father through the Son, through that ultimate great high priest who we didn't need to go and visit bringing a lamb. We could just come bringing our heart. There is complete freedom, complete openness to the Father, complete openness to God, and we no longer need this temple and this geographical location. So does that mean we just ignore what this passage is saying? Well, on one level, yes. Don't burn me yet. On one level, we do, because we don't go to Jerusalem. We don't go to that one place to worship God through the sacrifices and the offerings in the temple that he would put in place. We don't follow the letter of this law. What we should do is follow the spirit of it and the heart of it, which is this: worship God in the way that God has asked us to worship him. Worship him according to the desires of his heart. You see, there's a fundamental shift that happens in the life of Jesus that goes from worshipping God in the temple to worshipping him everywhere. And I think it can be summed up by these two words. It's gone from you've got to come to now you can go. It's come versus go. And Jesus isn't saying that the Old Testament is wrong. He is not saying that these commands were bad. He's saying that there is a shift that goes from just one nation to being all people can come to the Father. A shift from being a temple-located worship to God being present everywhere so that everyone might engage with him. Worship is no longer about coming to the temple. Worship is about going out into the world and glorifying in God there. Worship is about meeting God in all places, not just in one place. Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, Paul says this, "In view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices." That is your reasonable act of spiritual worship. Offering our bodies as a living sacrifice. Not a sacrifice that's dying, that's dead on an altar. But as we stay alive, giving every part of our life. Giving every moment, every act, every conversation, every relationship, every single thing to God as an act of worship. That is what it looks like. No longer just going to the temple. But, there's also another way that I want to look at this. Because it's not just about our worshipping life. It's about the way that we conduct our whole life. And it has an impact on the way that we see mission. On the way that we see our task to reach the world. Because in the Old Testament era, when God was located in the temple, there are times when people are getting excited about people from other nations coming to that place. I want to read some words from Zechariah chapter 8. You don't need to turn to them. I'm just going to be talking about them very briefly. We read this, "The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, 'Come, let us go to entreat the favour of the Lord and to seek the Lord.' I'm going. Many peoples and many nations shall come to seek the Lord in Jerusalem, to entreat the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from every nation, of every language, shall take hold of a Jew, grasping his garment and saying, 'Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.'" That's an exciting picture of mission, an exciting picture of those from other nations grabbing hold of someone who is Jewish and saying, "Take us with you to your temple. Take us with you to your nation because we've heard that God is there. We've heard that God is with you." That is an exciting picture, and sometimes I think we can fall into the trap of thinking that's still how things should work now. That someone would grab hold of us and say, "Take us to church because we've heard that God is there." I have no problem with people bringing their friends to church. I think it's great. But here's the thing. If we no longer just have to worship God in a centralized location where everyone's come together, if we worship God wherever we are, if it's gone from come to meet with God to go and meet him in your everyday life, then the imperative for mission has also changed. It's no longer about come to the big gathering, to the big event, to the big group where everyone's all together. Mission is now about go. Go and make disciples of all nations. Go into the world. Go and spread the good news. Go and make disciples yourselves. Instead of trying to bring people to a place where you think God is more present so that other people can do it for you or with you. See, we have a responsibility to be getting out there, to be out in the world, to be meeting God in the world, to be meeting other people in the world. I think it's great when people come along to church for the first time. And maybe that's you this morning, and I'm really glad you're here. But this isn't the only place where God is alive. This isn't the only place where he's at work. We need to recognize that we live in a different time than the time when these words were first written. That doesn't mean we ignore the heart of them. It means that we have to apply them differently. As we move on in these verses, we see some of those principles alive. Look at verse 8. "You shall not act as we are acting here today, all of us according to our own desires." The people are told that when they will rest in God, in verse 10, there will be a new way of doing things. And it won't be something where everyone is just doing things their own way, but everyone not only will be coming together to one place, but everyone will be coming together in a heart to do things in a way that God has asked them. This sense that the whole is more important than the individual. Then we also see in verses 11 to 12 that the concept of people coming together as family. You'll bring everything together. You'll be together with your sons and your daughters, your male and female slaves, Levites, people who reside in your towns. There's this idea of a whole community coming together in worship. Now, although the way that would happen has changed, because it wasn't about everyone making the trek to get to Jerusalem to worship together, to bring their offerings, to do everything all in one place. Some of the heart of this still stands. Because fundamentally what this is saying is the whole is more important than just me. Me isn't as important as us. And it was never about us anyway. It's always been about the world. It's always been about people coming together or not coming together, people glorifying God and worshipping him and putting him at the center of their life so that the world might see it. That's always been the purpose. The purpose of the temple was a visible place where the nations could see people flocking because there was something there and that they might want to go with them. Now, you and I are a temple of God. You and I are a temple of the Holy Spirit. That people might see God is at work in you and might want to come to you because they can see that God is alive there. That's the opportunity we get now. With the Spirit living within us, it's never been about us. It's always been about a world seeing God alive and wanting to meet him there. That's the opportunity we get. Worship isn't just about me. Worship isn't just about us. Worship isn't just about what happens when we get together. Worship is a whole life that says, God, be at the center of who I am. That I might be shaped, that I might be transformed, that people might see that you are alive. The temple was there to reveal God. We are here to reveal God. To choose to worship God is to say, I'm going to hew down everything that I put in the way that stops God being king of my life, and to allow him to reside, to dwell, to live, to put his name within us. When we do that, when we make that choice, when we do that more and more and more fully, the world can't help but notice, because we will be changed. We will be different. We will be transformed. I want to pray that would be true of us, that it would be true of us when we gather, because I'm not against gathered worship. Of course I'm not. I'd be in the wrong job if I was. I think it's great that we can come together to encourage, to inspire one another. But the important work, the most important, is when we are worshipping God in our everyday, in our normal. So I want to pray that God would be transforming us gathered and transforming us scattered into people who are seeking him so fully and letting him be at the center of our lives, that we would truly choose worship. Father, you have heard the cries of our hearts this morning. You know what it is that each of us faces. You know what it is that each of us gets excited about or gets nervous about. You know what it is that drives us. You know what it is that daunts us. Lord, I would pray that for a brief moment, now, as we continue to enjoy being in your presence together, instead of in your presence by ourselves, I pray that you would be giving us a glimpse that allows us to put to one side all of those things and allows us to give you the place that you alone deserve, at the center of our lives individual and our lives as a family. And help us to be people that go in worship and go in mission and go to show you to the world. Thank you that we don't have to do that by getting people to come along to a temple. We just have to do that by looking someone in the eye and being people who are on a journey with you. Give us the courage and the conviction to do that this morning and this week, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.